Hi, everybody, and welcome to InterPride's panel about Pride, Trailblazers, and Luminaries. We acknowledge that the sexual and gender progress that we've been enjoying is the result of the contribution. It's the result of the impact of strong, courageous, and warm people who have been on the front lines for a long time. These people are models that we reference. They are models we learn from. So we contribute, like they did, to the betterment of our realities. This panel gathers three individuals whose inception and development of Pride honors our past, celebrates our present, and informs our future. We're honored to have with us Robyn Kennedy. She is a 78er, she'll tell us more about it, founder of Sydney Pride, involved in Pride for more than 45 years. Linda DeMarco is the current president of Boston Pride, involved in it for more than 23 years. And Peter Tatchell, one of the founders of London Pride and the coordinator of Reclaim Pride in London. Hello, everybody, and thank you for being with us.
Hi, Andy.
This is an open conversation where we'd like to learn from you. We want to understand how things started with you, how you started being involved with Pride, how things evolved, the challenges you encountered, and so on. So, Robyn, 78er, tell us more about this.
Okay, that term refers to the people that participated in the first Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras in 1978. Pride actually started before that in Sydney. Really the first organisation that we'd probably call a Pride started in about 1970. I became involved in 1975 in that organisation. But what we see as the real beginning of Pride was in 1978 when we held a nighttime street party. Well, it was supposed to be a party. It was to commemorate the 9th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. And we decided that we would do something a little bit different. When we had our normal march that we would always have in the morning, but in the evening, we decided, let's just do something fun. So we got our permit and we got a flat top truck and played the same two songs over and over. And we danced down the street in outfits, in costumes. So people wore all sorts of fancy dress and makeup. And so, you know, it was going really well. And then the police intervened. And I won't go through the whole history, but essentially what happened was the police violently attacked the participants. And I think we had just really had enough of the persecution that we'd all experienced for many years by police and society in general. So it was at that point that we fought back, a bit like Stonewall in a way. It was just this unspoken thing that went through the crowd that we weren't going to let this happen because the police, apart from bashing people, they started to drag people into police vans, arresting people. And we just fought them. We just pulled them out of the vans. We actually jumped in the vans and pulled them out. And we had a tug of war with police. So we'd be on one side, the police would be on the other. We're trying to free people. But it was really actually a very traumatic experience. The police did manage to arrest 53 people, but we went to the police station after that night and stayed outside all night singing and managed to bail people out. but people were actually badly beaten up. One person in particular who had to be admitted to hospital. But I guess to cut a long story short, it was a milestone moment for us. And it was at that point we felt inspired that we were never going to turn back. And Mardi Gras the parade has been held every single year since 1978. Even COVID didn't stop us.
Linda?
Well, that's very it's a great story, Robyn. I actually haven't heard that before. I can't imagine you guys pulling people out of those paddy wagons. Wow, that's a really great story. That's not as exciting as my story, but you know, we do what we can to help the Pride movement, right? So I started I started volunteering, I think in '97, just showing up and doing I was doing a food cart at a festival, and I just got involved. There was a big brouhaha, and people I just joined the committee, and all of a sudden everyone quit the committee, and I was left with like myself and one other person, and I was like, okay, let's start all over again. So we started all over again and incorporated a Pride, and I had no place to go, so I had started in the back of my pickup truck and just kind of organized it, didn't know what to do, but we figured it out. We started a festival, and back then there was no, computers, so it was all on paper and pen and chalking spaces where people go, and we put flyers up saying we were going to have a march, and people signed up, and we just lined them up in paper. And same thing, we went and got a permit to do it, and they let us do it. And, at that point there was, I think maybe 15 people at the festival and 30 people, 30 different groups marching, not even. And so that was like 98. So that was like 23 years ago. Now, this last one that we had in 2015, there were over 430 groups and about 130 vendors. So it was a big difference from when I started to where I am now, right now. When I started there was a lot of, who are you? What are you doing? What do you want to do this for? And this is not right. A lot of groups on the sideline yelling at you while you're marching, protesters marching in and around the festival area. It's a stark difference from where you are right now, where you have social media, brings you more groups to to get involved, gets the word out. So we ended up having 1.1 million people in Boston in 2019. Far cry from when it was when I started. So it just grew and grew and grew. And each year you learn different things and you experience different things. But certainly, courageous of you, Robyn, to start it off that way. I remember my very, very first Pride when I was younger. I just showed up and I didn't know what was going on, and people had brown bags on their heads marching up the street, and I didn't know what they were for, and they were hiding their faces because there were cameras there. And I remember this woman coming over to me, do you want to hide your face? I'm like, well, I don't have a job. I'm just in school. And then she said, what about your parents? And I was like, oh no. And I jumped out of line. Didn't have a bag. So we all experience different things. So that was mine.
And you, Peter? We need to unmute your mic. Let me do this.
Can I go now? I was an activist in the London Gay Liberation Front in the early 1970s. at that time, the predominant response to LGBT plus people was, you should be ashamed. So a group of about 30 or 40 of us decided that we were going to counter that with an affirmation of gay pride. So that's how the first gay pride parade began in London in 1972. Back then, of course, most LGBT plus people were closeted. They wouldn't dare come out, let alone show their faces in a public march. So it was a very big gamble. We started off by leafleting bars and clubs. We got some support, but also quite a lot of negativism. You know, quite a lot of LGBT plus people felt it was wrong. They thought, you know, we shouldn't be visible. We shouldn't be public. You know, we were inviting trouble. You know, we'll only call the police down on us. So it's better to shut up and keep your head down. To which our response was, if you keep your head down, you'll get it kicked again, again, and again. We have to stand up loud and proud. So that first Gay Pride March in London was a big gamble. Only about 700 to 1,000 people turned out, but we were quite relieved. You know, that was, you know, we were fearful of an embarrassing 50 or 60 or 100. So the numbers turning out was a relief. The police response was very intimidating. There was almost a police officer for every single marcher. At times we were hemmed in. Some officers openly abused us. The public response was a mixture of hostility and abuse, and some people from the sidewalk even threw bottles, cans, and coins at us. But the predominant public view was probably just gawping disbelief that LGBT plus people would dare show their faces in public. They couldn't believe we had the guts and temerity to do it. But there was also a section of the public, possibly actually close to a third, who were supportive. You know, they clapped, cheered, gave us the thumbs up. So, you know, the march went ahead. You know, it was a success in our terms. We finished with what we called a gay day in Hyde Park, a sort of LGBT plus picnic where everybody brought their own food, drink, and sweets and so on. And really that very small beginning emboldened us with the confidence to do it again the year after, and the year after, and the year after. So eventually, by the mid to late 1990s, there were over 100,000 people in the London Pride Parade. And in 1997, the post-parade festival on Clapham Common had over 300,000 people. That was really the high point of London Pride. Then after that, there were a succession of attempts by gay businesses to take it over, to make it into a money-making operation. There were a couple of failed or not very successful attempts by community organizations to reconstitute it. And now we have a London Pride, you know, committee, which is self-selected. It's not democratic or accountable. It's, you know, chooses its own members. It really has lost touch with Pride as it originated. It's very corporate, very commercial. Human rights demands rarely feature. And that's why I coordinated on the 24th of July this year, a Reclaim London Pride Parade, a people's march for LGBT plus liberation, which was very much rooted in community groups and grassroots individuals, but also with a very strong human rights dimension. You know, we had 5 key LGBT plus human rights demands. And it had an energy, a diversity, a grassroots feel that I haven't witnessed in Pride in London for 30 or 40 years. So I think we have sort of perhaps created a new beginning. Pride in London, of which I'm still a patron, albeit a not very happy one, will go ahead in September, but I think it's lost a lot of community support because it just isn't listening to the community anymore.
There is a very beautiful thing to hear you all speak. Not only is it very authentic, but it's very emotional. You know, it's very important. This is a very important panel. It's very important that we understand we're standing on the shoulders of giants, people who really have been people who have done things that allow us today to live the way we live. And when we want to be involved in Pride in particular, we do have this responsibility to understand and to act so the younger generations don't have to go through what we went through. And I'm very confident that the three of you, Robyn, Linda, and Peter, when you're doing your work and when you take a bit of distance, you do understand that people of my generation, I'm 32 today, that we live better wherever we are, thanks to the impact that you have produced. And as a Pride founder myself in Beirut, Lebanon, to work for the completion of decriminalization of LGBT status, there's a lot of things you said that resonate, that echo here. For example, when Robyn was talking about the 53 arrested people and they went to the police station, and I remember that also Robyn once said that the people gathered in front of the police station and were singing. So the people who are being beaten would know that there are others from the community, from the group of people, from their friends outside waiting for them. And then when Linda, you said that you were walking and people were shouting at you, and then Peter speaks of closeted people who didn't dare show their faces in London. And then you remember that Linda had just said that people were wearing brown bags because they didn't want others to acknowledge them, to recognize them, actually not acknowledge them, to recognize them. This is very strong, this is important, and this is not limited to either Boston or Sydney or London. This is a situation all over the world. And this is the importance of this panel, to understand that this is not a historical overview. This is literally us understanding the path of our Pride organizers, so we don't reinvent the wheel. And I'm very proud to be doing this with you here. So thank you very much again for giving InterPride and Copenhagen 2021 your time and your insight. You know, our group of LGBT people, community, friends, critics is a very challenging group of people. There are a lot of critics, there are a lot of attacks, there are a lot of passion, there are a lot of mixed emotions. How do you get, as Pride organizers, to navigate this landscape that often is hostile? What, for example, is the most challenging issue that you had to face during your life of Pride organization? Robyn, perhaps, if you would like to start, or somebody else?
No, I'm happy to start. I think going back to the beginning, as Peter and Linda have mentioned, just how hard it was to actually be out at that time, because there was significant personal risk involved. And we know after the first Mardi Gras, for example, for those people that were arrested, they paid a very high price for that. So they were kicked out of home, or they lost jobs, or lost tenancies, and some actually took their own life. So it was very difficult to be out. So it was very difficult to be an activist. So that was a big challenge. I think for lesbians, we also had the issues at the time of being women in a very patriarchal society. I mean, things have changed a bit, but not entirely. But at that time, we were facing the same issues as straight women, I suppose, in limited career options and expectations of marriage and children and all of that. And the other problem I think we had was that lesbians were basically invisible, even in the movement. We were assumed to basically not exist by society, or if we did, in a very stereotyped way. So we had to really work hard to overcome all of those challenges. And to some extent, we're still working on them. But progress was made, even if it has taken quite a long time to do that. I mean, in Sydney, for example, it took 14 years of solid activism for homosexuality to be decriminalised, and then much longer for sexual preference to be included in anti-discrimination legislation. So it's all of these challenges, one after the other. I'll pass over to someone else.
Yeah, there's always a risk in doing activism. We put ourselves out there to change hearts and minds of folks. I can totally appreciate Peter saying the prides are becoming a lot more commercial. But I remember, Peter, going to the hospitals and asking them to participate, and going to companies and asking them to participate, because I was seeing youth being so discouraged, like, where can I work that people will accept me? Or can I grow up and be a doctor? Can I be a lawyer? So I actively went and knocked on doors and said, come on, just march in the parade. The first hospital, a lot of my friends passed away from AIDS, and I spent a lot of time at Beth Israel. So I immediately went back to that floor and the nurses there and just said, please just march. And that was good at the time, because people were like, look, I can do that. I can be a doctor, and I can be an airline pilot. I remember getting some pilots to do. And a couple of pilots came and they actually lost their jobs. So, and they risked themselves, they risked their jobs. They knew what they were doing. They wanted to do it, but they lost their jobs. The nurses were really hesitant towards doing it, but it took a lot of time. And so I think we went from one pendulum to the other, Peter. So, because I can see where, that's too commercialized. But at the time when I was out recruiting folks to get more involved, was to save kids from killing themselves, to show people they can come out of the closet, to let women and lesbians know that they have safe spaces to go to. And it was a challenge. And Robyn, I agree that it was, look at us, 2 women on this panel. A lot of the women came forward. We did a lot of work. Not to say that the boys didn't go through a lot, but not to stereotypical stuff, but it was in the beginning. I only did it in the late 90s, and you folks started, Peter in the 80s and Robyn in the 70s. So we have definitely had to come a long way, and maybe too much so. But I think we've changed a lot of hearts and minds along the way, which is what we needed to do, not only within our community, but our allies are really, really important for us to have.
I think some of the big challenges for Pride in London have been the issue of funding. I mean, as the parade got bigger and bigger, the pressure grew to make it more fancy, to have more stages and satellite events at the end. So the issue of funding came up. And I've got no objection in principle to corporate funding. But I think what has happened in London Pride is that the corporate has sort of taken over. It is branded as a corporate event. You know, the corporate branding far outshines LGBT plus human rights, and that, I think, means the balance is wrong. Also, of course, there's the tension between, is it a party or a protest? And again, I've got nothing against a great celebration. Indeed, the first ever gay pride in London in 1972 was billed as a carnival parade, but it also had a very strong political human rights agenda. And I think that today, Pride in London is overwhelmingly a celebration and a party. You know, the human rights demands are pretty much invisible, if they exist at all. I mean, I can't remember a Pride in London which had a human rights theme. That's probably, you're talking about 20 or 30 years ago. Now they have vague themes like love is beautiful, you know, completely meaningless and anodyne. And in the parade, the floats of big corporates totally dominate because they're the only ones that have got the money to make them. So the community groups get sidelined and invisibilized. So I think that's, you know, another reason why Reclaim Pride in London came about this year. People just thought that the balance was wrong. You know, also, of course, the main Pride in London, the official Pride in London parade, has colluded with the police and others to make all kinds of restrictions. So, you know, with the connivance of the police, the Mayor of London, and the local municipal authority, Pride in London imposes a limit of about 30,000 marchers. So every year, tens of thousands of people are turned away and not allowed to march. You know, that's completely against the ethos of Pride. Another big challenge has been who should be allowed to march in Pride parades. Now, I think Pride should be open and inclusive, but I think there should be some limits. So, you know, we did have to fight, but eventually secured the agreement of Pride in London that far-right extremists like UKIP and others would not be allowed to march in the parade on the basis that they were opposed to LGBT plus rights and were just using their participation as a way to recruit new members to their extremist cause. The other issues we have, of course, I don't think the police should be allowed to march in uniform until they've apologized for their historic harassment of our community. Here in Britain, no police service has apologized for the way they victimized the LGBT plus community for decades. Also, I don't believe that the Home Office, which is in charge of the immigration and asylum policy, should be allowed to march because they are detaining in prison-like conditions and then seeking to deport LGBT plus refugees who have fled persecution. I think both police and Home Office employees are welcome to march as individuals, but not in uniform and not with the insignia of their organizations, because those organizations are or have been our persecutors in the past.
This is a great critical overview that not only applies to London, but also to almost all other prides. What do you think, Robyn and Linda?
I think the participation of police is a very current issue. And I agree with Peter that police should not be marching in uniform. Yes, I agree. If they are members of our community or allies, welcome to march as individuals. We've had a similar issue with the participation of military wearing uniforms. But at the moment, at least in Sydney, police are wearing uniforms in the parade, but it is very controversial and there's a lot of opposition to it. So I can see that probably changing in the future. Unlike London, we did actually get an apology from the police for what happened in 1978. a couple of years ago, the police commissioner apologised for what took place at that time. And we also received apologies from the New South Wales Parliament and also the newspaper that published all of the personal details of the people that were arrested because of the horrendous results from publishing those details. There was an apology. But it is a big issue, I think, about who should be marching in our parades and what sort of constraints and limitations are placed. I know for Sydney, every year the issues of anti-terrorism come up more and more, and the cost of mitigating that increases all the time. And, Mardi Gras has to bear those costs. So the whole atmosphere starts to change from the sort of joyous celebration to one of, I don't know, maybe defensiveness. This sort of all these precautions have to be taken, which is a pretty horrible thing that we have to deal with, I think.
Yeah,
Linda,
it is a new issue going around. So Hattie,
yeah.
Policing and prides and stuff like that. I mean, it's not new that they need to apologize for their, what happened early on, but it is 2021 now. The folks who work now in 2021 were not the folks who worked and did the crimes in 1970. So it's different in every, I know it's predominant right now in this United States and New York. I know they did come out and apologize in New York as well, Robyn, as they did in Sydney, but they still don't allow them in uniform to march. So here we are censoring our own putting people back in the closet per se. In their uniforms. Like in Boston, they don't even wear their uniforms. They just wear a t-shirt that says "Goal Gay Officers Action League." So it never really became up a thing because they wanted to show that they were part of a team per se. So it was different officers or different departments all under one t-shirt kind of thing. So I think it's different, Hattie, wherever you go.
Yeah, but I have a question. The bombing of the Boston Marathon had definitely impacted a way or another the way Boston Pride would be organized the years that followed the bombing. That was quite an event, correct? Like, what do you recall from it?
Well, it changed up a lot of things now. It changed up a lot because, now you change, the route was changed, there was a lot more fencing. There was a lot more barricades to let, to stop ramming of streets because that was happening. Before, it was just you gathered and lined people up and you have the march. And so after the marathon, we had to have meetings, more threats from different organizations who wanted to make themselves known. It's not that we didn't have threats before, but it was treated a little differently after the marathon. People's minds were heightened by that activity. And then, of course, they were the first responders, so they were there. So, we needed to have them at the events that gathered lots of people at.
Can I raise another issue, which is big in London? There are also calls that the London Pride Parade should prohibit fossil fuel companies from marching in the parade on the grounds that we are facing a climate emergency and that these companies are contributing to the damage to our planet and indeed our futures. Likewise, there are calls to ban arms manufacturers. So British Aerospace Systems and others sell weapons to tyrannical regimes that persecute LGBT plus people. Those weapons have been used to target populations in Afghanistan and Iraq, where innocent civilians have been killed. So these are two other issues that are very much in the minds of a lot of people here in London. You know, to what extent are we a completely open parade? You know, to what extent do we need to have ethical guidelines, and where do we draw those lines?
You know, I hear you talk, I look at you, and I believe that it's extremely important that you do write and you do publish your memoir, especially the accounts that you consider to be the most trivial, the most useless, the most, oh, who would care about it? And I hear this from a lot of Pride organizers who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. You know, it's important to acknowledge that it is this human, this personal connection that connects Pride organizers together, that gives us the strength to continue. You know, earlier, Peter, and I've been taking notes, Peter spoke about the first time you did the Pride in London when you had the LGBT picnic. And then Linda spoke about the risks of activism. And, you know, every time you say something, it echoes, it resonates with me. And I know that it resonates and will resonate with a lot of our viewers and the people who are watching this and who will, you know, will go back to this recording. So, you know, the experience is not only a personal one, like your experience, not only yours, it is a collective one. And it's very valuable to share it with what we consider to be its weakness, its strength, and so on. Peter, to a certain extent, and I do mean to a certain, only to a certain extent, you have done a bit of this, especially with your latest Netflix documentary called Hating Peter Tatchell, in which we go back to your, you know, to your story, to your years of activism from Australia to where you are today. And I was curious to understand how the Reclaim Pride in London that happened a few weeks ago in July 2021 did benefit from your experience organizing Pride and also from the direct action that you've been doing for decades now.
Well, it wasn't just me, of course, who did Reclaim Pride. We also had the backing of London Trans Pride, Lesbian Visibility Week, and UK Black Pride. It was our collective coming together, you know, which reflects, I think, you know, a new feeling or mindset within sections of the LGBT plus community here, that changes are necessary to the way in which Pride in London is organized. And many of you will be aware that there's been a lot of internal ructions within the organization over allegations of racism and bullying, and just not listening to the community and downplaying human rights issues. Now, that's an ongoing debate, and I welcome the debate. You know, I'm not saying that I've got all the answers or that I'm right, but I just think that we do need to have this debate, because what I'm saying is reflected by many other people in the community. And I think, you know, the way Pride grows is by us having conversations, hearing different voices, making sure that we check our privilege and that we look at ways in which more marginal people in our communities, so Black and ethnic minority, disability, and other backgrounds are included.
Intimate question for each one of you. What is the best advice that you should have given yourself along the way? Take a moment, think of this. It's a very important question. And then whenever you feel like it, just unmute and.
Yeah, well, I think it's patience for me, and I have a lot of patience. You know, sit back and think before you speak, and think about the situation, and just have a lot of patience. That's what I would recommend for people to do, because there are so many different voices out there with so many different opinions, and you need to listen to every single one of them. So having that means you need to have patience to listen.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think the thing I would have said to myself was just to remember that change takes time, and it's really one step at a time. And I think, you know, we were trying to change, and still really are trying to change so many things. It can feel overwhelming. And sometimes it feels like it's a long period between victories or achievements. So you have to sort of step back a little bit and just remind yourself that it is one step at a time, and reflect on progress, and then look at the next battle and keep working on that.
Back in 1972, I never imagined that almost 50 years later, I'd still be involved in organizing prides. But hey, it's a great honor and a great privilege. I feel so lucky. And, you know, I've been marched in every single London Pride parade since 1972. And I rearrange my calendar every year to make sure I never miss one. But, you know, for future generations, I think those of us who began things all those years ago, we need to impart our knowledge. We need to share our knowledge. We need to still be there as we are today, sharing our memories, our understanding of things back then, how they were done, because each new LGBT plus generation has to organize prides. And, you know, we can't be the ones on whose shoulders it always depends. So we need to train up, mentor, and support the new younger generation that are going to take pride forward. And in particular, to stand in solidarity with pride organizers and parades in developing countries in the global south, where they're often organizing in conditions of great risk and tyranny, risking their liberty and perhaps their lives. Those people to me are the true pride heroes of today. And I want to salute all those people in Africa, Latin America, Central America, you know, Asia, the Middle East, who are holding pride parades despite all the difficulties. You are absolute pride heroes to me.
So we understand that despite the criticism you have, you keep walking in pride and clear your calendar for this every year. Why so, Peter? What is pride for you?
Well, to me, pride is one of the great historic movements of the modern era. You know, it is, you know, an element of the great long historic struggle for LGBT plus liberation worldwide. It is perhaps one of the most successful universal events in the world today. I can't think of any comparable event that takes place in so many countries around the world based on the fundamental core principles of LGBT plus freedom and equality. You know, it's an incredible achievement that this movement has been universalized across all four corners of the planet. And of course, there are some countries where they don't have open prides, but often they have secret covert ones, like even in Iran or Bangladesh. You know, there are secret prides taking place. They're often very small, perhaps sometimes even just in people's homes, but they're being triggered and inspired by the prides taking place in other countries around the world. And it's fantastic to think that, you know, a pride parade in, you know, Boston, Sydney, or London can inspire people in far off countries where LGBT plus rights are not recognized, that it can inspire them to hold their own events. And of course, one day they will hold those events openly and proudly, because our queer freedom movement is an unstoppable global trend.
Certainly. And progress anywhere is progress everywhere. Robyn, Linda, for you, what is pride? Why do we keep on doing this?
For me, pride is remains what it has always been, which is this huge statement of visibility. This really remains one of the best ways to create change, because it's a public statement about our communities taking up space in the public domain and getting the message across that we're not going anywhere. You know, we used to say, you know, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. And I think that's still the message. And I completely agree with Peter about that visibility is inspirational to countries that cannot hold prides for whatever reason, even though they might be able to hold some other kind of event or something under the radar. The fact that they can see us celebrating our communities, ourselves in an open way is inspirational. And I always say, I mean, people say, oh, do we still need to march for pride? And I always say, look, even if you don't think you have to march for yourself, march for someone who can't, because that is really important to them, that they can see you, they can be inspired by that, and they can be encouraged to keep fighting for the ability to do the same thing in their own country.
So for me, I always say it's always someone's first pride, no matter where you go. So, you know, my first pride was very inspiring to me. And that feeling that I had as a young woman and realized that I was not alone was something that I wanted to make sure that I was able to participate in the pride movement. So when someone came to their first pride, they would have that exact same feeling, and I'm not alone, and I can be somebody. And whether it's for a young person or for an older person who can sit there at a pride event and go, I was a pioneer. I was part of this. Whether they went to a club at night in hiding, or they just were their authentic self walking down the street. Their bravery was what allowed us to do what we do now, you know. And then it's always an ally would come and just say, wow, all these people want is to be equal and to be part of society without having hate. So it's important to have a movement and to keep it going and to recognize that it is always someone's first pride, whomever it is.
I think also we need to acknowledge the great gains that have been won, and that is partly because of the pride movement, but also there are still battles to fight. So, you know, in the United States, there are huge attacks upon trans people. In Australia, there's a new bid to give religious organizations the right to discriminate against us. And here in Britain, we still have no ban on LGBT plus conversion therapy. And we still don't have reform of the Gender Recognition Act to ease the transition, legal recognition and transition of trans people. So, you know, there are still battles to fight, even in Western countries where huge gains have been made. And I think that pride organizers and events need to profile those ongoing human rights demands.
Especially that in more than 68 countries, LGBT status is illegal. It is a criminal offense. Thank you all for your kind words. They are very touching and they are very empowering, both on the personal and collective levels. Do write, do publish, document what you have to say. Don't be shy and don't be uselessly modest. We do request your insight and as much of history, of your personal history you would like to share with us. After all, your personal stories are our shared pride story. Thank you, Robyn Kennedy, Linda DeMarco, Peter Tatchell, for honoring us with your presence. This was the Pride Trailblazers and Luminaries, brought to you by InterPride.